Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally. This is another edition of Coach's Corner, and I've invited Timothy Dean Smith back on the show because we weren't really finished with the conversation. There is so much to leadership and really how to learn how to lead that we do have to have this other conversation. So today we're going to focus on, I'm going to make sure I got my notes right, communication and emotional intelligence. And Timothy Dean Smith is going to talk to us about that. Let's get started in the conversation. So let's talk about how you engage people in the coaching experience. Let's start there. And then let's move that conversation into communications. So let's talk about the coaching experience first. What does that look like to you?
Okay, thank you. Appreciate Dr. McNally, you having me on again. I really enjoy sharing knowledge like this, and we do a good job, I think. Well, what you're talking about is when people transition from what I call peer to leader role, there's some things that they need to be aware of, and the two most important, I feel, the two most important people skills are communication and emotional intelligence. You'll hear people reference these as soft skills. As you know from our first conversation, I'm a stickler for using the right words. I think people skills is more descriptive in terms of what we're really talking about. And these are not just for your skills you use in your professional life. These are used throughout life, personal and professional. And I feel that, these two, communication and emotional intelligence, are so intertwined that they need to be taught together. And these are a prerequisite when I coach first-time leaders. They need to have good, solid communication and emotional intelligence skills in order to be successful as a leader.
So let me ask a question then. I do talk about communication skills in my book, Walking the Path, but people have different ideas of what that may mean. And so for some people, communication may be speaking at a conference, and for some people, just giving directions. And for other people, such as myself, is really having a conversation with people to really understand where they're coming from. How are you envisioning this idea of communication?
Yeah, to put it in context, what I'm focusing on is face-to-face communication
Okay.
skills, whether it literally is face-to-face in occupying the same space, or virtually. You can get a lot of the same keys from communication as you do. But what we're doing today is we're talking about face-to-face communication skills.
Hmm. So with that, that is challenging because there is in communication, the old adage is, I may say something, but you may not understand what it is I'm trying to say. And I've had other conversations with people in management and leadership who have given directions to their people, and I'll call them that. I won't call them like subordinates or employees, to their people. And then they'll go away and they'll do their management or leadership job, and the people are left doing whatever. And so they're operating from an assumption of what may have been said and may not have been exactly what was meant. So is that part of, how does that fit into your teaching leaders to communicate?
That is very elementary. And I can't think of who said the phrase, but the phrase goes something like the illusion. A lot of times with communication, there's the illusion that it happened.
Hmm.
And I'll use texting for example. Just because you text somebody something doesn't mean, okay, they're well aware of it, they're done with it, I've communicated to them.
Right.
So what I do is I break communication down. There's really three phases of good communication. The first is empathic listening. There I go again with the words. Empathic really qualifies it. You truly need to listen with the other person's perspective and where they're coming from. So you don't have what they call a preconceived notion or agenda. You truly have to be listening with the intent to understand. Much easier said than done, because we have so many distractions today, and self-distraction is one of the biggest ones. But that's the first phase, empathic listening. And if you truly do that correctly, meaning you're listening you're not listening for buzzwords or trigger words or anything like that. You're truly listening. The next phase, which is pause and thinking about
Pause
what
and
they said
thinking.
and then your response.
Wow.
We have to pause and think, because if you were truly listening empathically, you didn't have a preconceived notion. And a true key that'll tell you if somebody's not listening is if they start to finish your sentence, or you're instantly done and they come right back. There's no way that they could have formulated that, taken the time to formulate that, and been truly listening to you. Now, what you and I are doing here over electronic and across cell phones, because of the nature of the signal, the way it works, often we talk over each other, but it's not because we're not being unpolite. It's just the way the technology works. You think the person's done, but you don't have that in face-to-face conversations. So that's the second phase: pause and then think. The third phase is, respond so that you can't be misunderstood. Okay, so those are really the three aspects of communication. The first is truly listening, specifically empathic listening, listen from the other person's perspective, and then pause and think about your response, and then respond back. I also have what I call empathic listening round 2. Now it's an interview technique, but when you are listening empathically and the other person is done, okay, just pause. You're going to do it. To them, it seems like an eternity. To you, if you're sitting there counting, it's 1001, 1002. Then people will tend to continue the conversation and open up even more. It's an old interview technique that was used forever. But if used correctly, especially if you've got maybe somebody that you're leading and they're having a problem, personal, professional, whatever it is, and they come to you initially and they're all hyped up, empathically listen, but then go into empathically listening round 2, because when you are pausing, but you're waiting for them to start again, and then they tend to catch a breath, and then you tend to get a little more deeper into what it is they're talking about.
So what I'm hearing is that for the leader, especially those who you are training and coaching to be more effective and efficient, they need to be comfortable with silence. And they
Yes.
need to be comfortable with thinking, and that's part of your part 2 of your 3-part strategy. And also what I'm hearing is they then I think the phrase is they have to be there in the moment. They literally have to be present in the moment, physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, if that's a part of what your makeup is. They have to be present, because without that, they can't possibly be listening, or they can't possibly be absorbing what's being communicated to them. Is that part of your coaching paradigm?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And it's a tough, listening is really hard. There's a saying that I have, I say, speak less, communicate more. Sounds like a paradox or sounds contradictory,
Right.
but the emphasis is on the listening, because if you really want your conversations to be shorter, listen more. And the empathic listening round 2 is a great example of that. You don't necessarily have to use that technique, but there's really those 3 phases. And if you are truly listening to someone from there and trying to be in their perspective, where they're coming from, your conversations are going to be shorter.
So, out of curiosity now, can you literally, really train somebody to be comfortable with silence? Because we're typically not. We want to fill that gap. We want to fill that silence. It feels weird. We often say, well, that was awkward. But you're literally telling me, which I already know and believe, that silence is golden. It gives us an opportunity to think, ponder, reflect. But can you
You
teach it?
just
Can you
you just
teach it?
had a great segue into one technique that I use to coach it. I will start out the phrase, silence is, and you finished it one time. You said
Gold,
silence is
golden. Yeah.
golden.
Yeah.
But then you also had the other finish to the sentence. Silence is awkward.
It is
And
awkward.
that's what we have to be
It can be awkward.
Yeah, because in today's day and age, technology drives so hard for us that we're always connected and we think we'll have to respond instantaneously, have the answer right there in front of us. So we're in this mode that we always have to be going, you always have to be responding, you can't have quiet time.
Right.
And people tend to be a lot of times just waiting for their turn to talk, and they're not truly listening. And a great example of this is in politics. You see it all the time. People were supposedly having a conversation, but it's really one talking over the other, and not even the common professional courtesy to let the other one finish.
Yeah.
That's a serious breakdown with our overall communications problems that we have. It's part of what I call the communication paradox. But
Well, then let's move on to the other part. Since you've talked about communication, and I love this, emotional intelligence.
emotional intelligence, it's a fancy way of saying it's like your GPS for your life, really. And there's really two phases. And before I go any farther with it, communication and emotional intelligence are, again, the two most important people skills. And they are so intertwined that's why it's important that they are taught and learned together.
Okay.
So emotional intelligence really has two perspectives, if you will. One is from your perspective, and one is from a social perspective. And it's about how you interpret the world. Okay. The first one being yourself. It's how you see things, how you interpret things, and how you understand your emotions. Emotional intelligence is not about suppressing your emotions. It's about understanding your emotions and responding accordingly. Okay. There's a fine line between reacting and responding, and then I'll get into that in a little bit. But then the other aspect of emotional intelligence is the social aspect of it, your understanding of the social environment and how you manage relationships. That's in a nutshell really what emotional intelligence is. Okay. When you take emotional intelligence and couple it with somebody's IQ, their intelligence quotient, and you couple it with their EI, emotional intelligence, or sometimes it's EQ, emotional quotient. Those two assessments, skills, tests, whatever, that really tells you and others how you tick. Okay. They're not interrelated in terms of being dependent on each other, meaning if you have a high IQ, you're going to have a high EQ. That's not the way it works.
Right.
IQ is totally something separate. That used to be the old barometer. Hey, he or she's got a high IQ, they're going to be successful. And now that really carries about 20% of an indicator of how successful somebody's going to be. 80% is in the emotional intelligence. Matter of fact, emotional intelligence is the highest predictor of potential performance.
Yeah.
And it's looked to for not just personal but professional. But those two skills are so important to have, that being able to communicate and also being able to understand the lay of the land and your associated emotions and how you react either yourself or you react or interact with people. Or now the key, let me finish on this key.
Go ahead.
It react as opposed to respond. Now, the way signals work in the body, and I didn't stay at Motel 6. I'm not a doctor, but I'm just going to you're a doctor. I'm not a doctor, but the way the signals in the body work is it'll go through your emotional center. Like say you stubbed your toe. Okay. Your initial reaction is, ow, ooh, the quick reaction.
And probably cuss too.
Yeah. The things, the dialogue gets blue, if you will. But that is because your signal goes through your emotional center of your brain first. And it's involuntary. It just happens. Now, that emotion or that signal will progress into the rational center of your brain, secondary to the emotion. That's why people have emotional reactions to things like that, or communications, or maybe you say the wrong word. What it is, that's an emotional reaction. Emotions are on the inside, your expressions are on the outside. And so you want to be able to, emotional intelligence helps you to respond as opposed to react. The react is an initial thing. where you can't really help it. It's just involuntary and it happens. Where if you have high emotional intelligence, you can kind of stop, think. These happen in split seconds, and then you come to a rational decision or understanding of how you respond to that situation.
So my key here is because we're talking about the coaching experience with you being the coach, how do you coach emotional intelligence? Like, how can you improve somebody's emotional intelligence to a level where they're effective in a leadership role? That's really, and you don't have to give away your secret sauce, but if you could just kind of tell me and our audience some of the key or just kind of the key elements that will, that so I can understand what you're saying, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. And there's no more secret sauce anymore. It's Colonel Sanders and all those people with their sauces, no secret sauce anymore. What I do is, because I'm not a professional in terms of the assessment, I defer to what's called, I use Talent Smart. It's Talent Smart EQ, and they're the individuals that started that. They have the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and they're the ones that started that. So what I do is I have people make the investment, buy the book, and then when you get the book, you get a free code to take an assessment. And then that'll also let you take a reassessment in sometime down the road. I just took my reassessment yesterday, but you got to find out where you're
Okay.
at first with your emotional intelligence quotient, and then based on what the recommendations are from the professionals, then I help you focus in those areas and how to do that. Some of it may be the listening side of things. And one of the things that is difficult for leadership, when you go from a peer or an individual contributor, you make that transition to a people-centered leader, is your perspective. Your perspective needs to go from me to we. And that's a huge perspective that needs to happen. And that's where emotional intelligence comes in a lot, because people tend not to have a lot of experience other than their own emotions, or worried about themselves. It's when you have to start taking care of the people in your care, those that you lead. That's when you have to be more savvy and more aware of your emotional intelligence. So there's a lot of things you can do. A lot of it is just being aware of where you have opportunities for improvement and focus on those. It could be listening. It could be keeping your emotions in check, not let things bother you so much. And all the other thing is to understand what your triggers are for those emotions that get you off track mentally. You know, it could be an individual. There could be certain individuals that just, oh, here he comes again, or here she comes again. But knowing that, okay, you can deal with that and know that, okay, I'm going to be interfacing or having a conversation with this person. You may not like the person, but you need to be professional and conduct business that way. So being aware of certain triggers is also part of the process. So the long answer to your question, but the short version is get them to the professionals, have them take this 10-minute assessment and really understand the results, and then the recommendations are great for how to improve in different areas. So then I take the people from there, and then I go into my area of expertise, which is developing, first-time leaders.
So with the limited amount of time that we have left, let me ask you two final questions. The first one would be, how long typically is your coaching time frame? When somebody's working with you, how long would it take them to grow into what you would consider an effective leader?
Yeah, no, I'm going to contradict myself based on our last conversation. I said 5 hours, but I've since upped that to 6, because there's some things that I've learned since then that need to be incorporated in, and it takes up a little bit of extra time. But the communication fundamentals training, once they go through the assessment process and have that information, because part of that training is going through the assessment with the attendees and really fine tuning and setting them up for success in communication and emotional intelligence. That's 3 hours. That's a separate course. My leader development is in the neighborhood of 6 hours now, and I take them through the fundamentals. We go solid in the fundamentals, and then we go through that. Then you let them go. Let them go in and get their feet wet, start leading their team. And then every month after that, I have coaching sessions where I help those people that have just transitioned kind of make sure they're on the right track, coach them along on any scenarios they come across, those kind of things. So it's not a put them in the classroom, educate them. Okay, you're done with. That's where a lot of people make the mistakes. They don't go through prerequisites on the front end. They think all they have to do is educate them, send them out there, and pray to God they get a little OJT with it, and they're good. But then you have to follow that up with the coaching, because inevitably they're going to have scenarios that are like, wow, I never heard this, or that this wasn't covered in your training. I never thought he or she would have
Wasn't
that.
in the book. Oh.
Yeah, it's not in the book. So that's where I come in the coaching side, and I don't necessarily answer questions. I ask questions and prod information on them so they get trained mentally to think through these things themselves. The old adage is you don't, fish for people, you teach them how to fish. And that's what I do. And it may be a little tough love sometimes, but one of the best questions you can ask as a leader or as a coach is, what do you think?
I love it.
A lot involved in that, because you're saying you want to understand what you're saying, and you're giving you the opportunity to solution this or get us on the right track.
So how can people find you? Where are you on social media?
I'm right here.
Well, that's one.
Yeah.
You're on my conversation, so they can find you through my podcast. How can
Right.
they connect with you?
All a one-stop shop URL. You just go to tdspi.com, and the TDS is my initials, TDS, Timothy Dean Smith. The PI is for performance improvement.com. So tdspi.com. And then, you can get a hold of me there. You can take the leader self-assessment. You can get lined up for any of my the courses that I offer, and just reach out for help. Or if you have a quick question, or you want to have a conversation, I'm here.
Cool. I love it. Timothy, thank you so much for joining me in conversation on Coach's Corner. For those of you who are watching and listening, I'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you, Coach.